This is Bill Williams speaking on the 18th day of September, 1968, from the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. With me are two of the great names, pioneer names, in the field of country music, men who were a credit to the profession from beginning to end. And we can't really say that because the end is nowhere in sight yet at this point. But we're speaking to Cliff and Bill Carlisle, and any serious student of country music knows the contribution these men and this family have given to the industry. Cliff, I'll ask you first to tell us your full name and where you were born and when you were born.
Clifford Raymond Carlisle, and I was born near Wakefield, Kentucky, in Spencer County, and May the 6th, 1904 is my birth date.
And Bill, what about you?
I was born in 1908, Wakefield, Kentucky, Spencer County.
And your full name is?
William Tolliver Carlisle.
William Tolliver. And how is Tolliver spelled?
Toliver.
Right. All right, now, what about your early childhood? You were 4 years apart, Cliff being the older. I'll ask Cliff first and discuss some of the things you remember about your early childhood. What was life like in the Carlisle family?
Well, of course, we in the early part of our childhood life, we lived in the country, and of course, country life is not without its pleasures, or you might say it's not without a lot of other things that come your way in life, in the way of disappointments and so on. But we had quite a bit of work to do in the country. I presume this is what you want to hear. And we worked on the farm. We raised tobacco. Of course, we do the things that people do, raising tobacco. And then, of course, when that day's work was over, we had to do our slopping the hogs, feeding the cows and the hogs, and all this stuff that people do in the country after their initial day's work is finished. The country life is not an easy life. It's usually pretty tough, and was tougher back then and harder then than it is today, because today there's many modern things that we use that back then we had to do with our hands. But if you want to ask some point-blank questions, why, this you would probably get better answers for your tape here.
Sure, Cliff. I'll ask Bill first of all. In your reminiscing of the past, what about music? Was music a part of your childhood as far back as you can remember?
Well, yes, Bill, we used to sit around, I remember at nighttime, around the fireplace and sing the hymns. And our father was he was a music teacher. He taught classes at church. And, of course, they were really very religious people. I say were. Our mother and father passed on. But, getting to the more light things, I never, for recreation. Now, I'll never forget this, what we would do for recreation. Sunday was the day that we would play.
Sure.
Go to church and play. And we didn't have time much the other days. But we would watch while we were working and find a bumblebee's nest. And we'd mark where it was, And when Sunday came, we'd get us a handful of bushes, a little brush, and we'd whip them out. Buck bushes. Now, that was our recreation. Sometimes we'd end up with one of them stingers on the eye, on the head,
Added a little challenge to it.
Might have a big nose one week, and the next week it was little.
Sometimes we'd whip them, and sometimes they'd whip us.
But the challenge was always there. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's typically true of our era when youngsters improvised and sometimes had a lot more fun than youngsters today because they
That's
did
right.
it themselves. Sure.
That's right.
Now, Bill, you mentioned your father's involvement in music. Did your mother sing?
Yes, she could sing, but she was not as musically inclined as our father, because he read notes, and he wanted us to learn it. And Cliff could tell you about that. We didn't want to learn it. We didn't want to take the time. He had a blackboard, and he tried to teach us, but we wanted to do it our way. We wanted to sing it by ear,
Right.
Of course, we could add a little extra stuff in there.
Well, Cliff, did you ever learn to read notes?
No, I could finally learn to kind of stagger along on the shape note. Of course, that's different than the
Sure.
other type. But that's about as far as I can go on notes.
Now, what's the first instrument you learned to play?
I learned to play the what they call the Hawaiian guitar, the Hawaiian steel guitar.
Just the old dobro?
That's what they call
Well,
it.
it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Well, you can make a steel guitar, a Hawaiian guitar, out of any guitar. All you have to do is put what they call a steel nut down under the string so that they'll raise up where they won't touch the fingerboard of your guitar. But the dobro is something else. I don't know.
It's a make, isn't it?
It's a dobro, but I wished I knew who was the instigator of making that first guitar, the first dobro. But I suppose they tell me that I am one of the first, and maybe the first, to introduce this dobro instrument. And
Did you make it yourself?
no, I bought the dobro guitar from a place in Chicago, and I thought for a long time that the national people made it, the national instrument people, but I found out later that they didn't. So I don't know the history behind the dobro guitar, but I do know this, that the dobro, I'll have to give it credit for helping popularize me back in my day.
Sure. Bill, what was your first instrument, you recall?
Guitar from Sears Roebuck.
Bought it yourself, huh?
Bought it myself. Well, I worked and
Did you teach yourself to play it?
well, yeah, you might say there was a fellow lived next door to us, and he could play. This was after we moved to Louisville from the country, and he played, about 3 or 4 chords. I learned 3 chords, like G and C and D, from him, and from then on I had to figure it out for myself. Cliff and I, of course, Cliff he was in the business professionally, about 3 years before I was. I would say, wouldn't you, Cliff?
That's what I'd say.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Well, then when you joined him, Bill, did you begin as the Carlisle Brothers, or did you join as a single act yourself? Or come
No,
in
it's
as a single
Carlisle
act?
Brothers. Yes, we worked at Carlisle Brothers. I don't know exactly how long, but I would say around 25 years worked together.
33.
Was it 33?
Was it 33 years?
33 years.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Cliff, when you started out on your own, did you intend to make a career of this?
Well, just frankly, Bill, I tell you, I didn't think much about it at that time. I knew I liked the business, and always did like music, and especially I loved the Hawaiian guitar. And when I took this thing up and started playing it, I started playing hillbilly style, what we call hillbilly, called country today. We call it hillbilly style back in the day. But the Hawaiian guitar, it's the same thing. It's played with the steel, played with the same way and everything. It's just 2 different instruments and 2 different styles of music. And I played quite a bit of Hawaiian music back in the day when I first started, before I got into the
When I know dates are a little hazy to all of us, but can you recall when you did start approximately?
professionally, probably around 1921, 22, somewhere around that.
Did you plan at the time, did you have in mind that Bill would join you as part of the act?
I don't think I ever answered your question. I'll beat the devil around the bush on you if you don't watch me. This goes back to the original question that you asked. I didn't start out to make a career of the thing, really. I didn't even think about it. I knew I liked it, and it turned into a career for me. That's just about as far as I can go. I didn't really plan anything till later on.
Now, Bill, Cliff already in the business 2 or 3 years. Did you decide that you wanted to join him, or did he suggest you join? How did it come about?
Well, when Cliff first started playing the guitar, I wasn't too much. I was interested. I was younger than him, and I was interested more in playing a little bit, you know. And of course, Cliff.
Tell him how I had to make you.
Yeah, well, he'd get after me, you know, and I'd sit and I'd practice till I'd get tired. Sometimes I'd accidentally break a string on purpose, and I could quit. That'd be the only way, maybe, you know. But yeah, Cliff. That's the reason, I guess. He was playing a lot better. Then I had to learn, and he had already learned how to play. See, it wasn't too much fun to me, you know, because my fingers would get sore, till I got those calluses on there, you know. Right. But then I remember we got a show in Louisville, Kentucky, on a station, WLAP, which is now in Lexington, Kentucky. We had a Saturday night Carlisle Jamboree, we called it. Remember that, Claire?
Oh, boy.
And we had a time on that. Of course, we didn't get paid, but we had fun.
It was just the two of you on this one show?
Well, and our father, sometime he'd go up there with us, and our brothers, and we'd all sing sometime together, you know.
Group,
That's right, yeah.
How long did this last, Bill?
Well, this lasted until one day, W.R. Calloway from Brunswick Records. It was Brunswick then, when they Cliff. Was it?
No, it was the American Record Corporation.
Yeah, that's right.
They bought Brunswick.
Right. They came through. Of course, that back then, you know, they had a scout man that came around. It's not like it is today. You have to go hunt them up.
Bill, I'm going to ask you to hold at this point while we go to the next tape and continue this story. This is part 2 of a tape with Bill and Cliff Carlisle, recorded September 18, 1968 at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. And Bill, in the first portion of the tape, you were discussing a facet of your career, and we'll pick up right there, please.
Well, they used to have, record companies had recording scout, artist scout, man goes out and looks for talent scout called. And so they came through Louisville, and Cliff and I, that's where we first started recording. Well, Cliff, you know, a while ago we was talking about he got into the business before I did. But Cliff had already, he was already to go. In other words, he and Wilbur Ball, a guy by the name of Wilbur Ball, had worked together for a long time. So, well, I say long. How long, Cliff? About 4 years? Before I joined?
Something like that. We had already recorded for Jeanette Record Company up in Richmond, Indiana, for about 18 months or.
For Jeanette Records?
Yeah. Of course, today, you know, these record companies, the bigger record companies, bought these other record companies out, and they're on different labels and things. Nowadays, you don't recognize the label, but you recognize the people, of course.
But that's an important part of history. Your first recording was on Jeanette.
That's right.
And this was done in Indiana?
My first recording with Wilbur Ball, but the first recording as Bill and Cliff are. Bill made some solos, the same as I did, and we went as the Carlisle Brothers. That was done in New York City, headed by Art Satherley. Yeah. He was the recording manager at that time, and the name of that company was the American Record Corporation, who owned the labels of Perfect, Romeo, Oriole, Melotone, and I don't know, several others.
Bill, your first recording then, was it as the Carlisle Brothers?
As the Carlisle Brothers. We had a contract as the Carlisle Brothers. We had a single contract as Cliff Carlisle and I had a contract. So when we would go up there, Bill, we would record maybe like, say, 24 songs apiece, 25, while we were there, because we wouldn't make a trip maybe over every 2 or 3 years, to record. And so my first number that I ever recorded was Rattlesnake Daddy, and it's the first song I ever wrote, and it hit. I made $50 on it.
Because
Because
it was a hit, yeah.
That was good money.
it was a big hit, but we get, say we went there to record, we get $50 a side, and that was big money. If we did 22, that's $1,000. Is that right? Yeah.
Sure.
So you take $1,000 then was worth $5,000 now. You could do as much with it.
What did you say, Cliff?
Figure with him here with it.
Got his pencil out. Yeah.
But when you did that, then that was the flat rate, and that was it. And that's the deal that we had. I don't think Cliff had the same deal as what I had.
He may have
Now,
had a better deal.
he may have
just
been
never told you. Yeah.
He may have been holding out on me.
We signed these contracts both standing at the same desk at the same time. Don't get no ideas.
All right. Rattlesnake Jump, was that it?
Rattlesnake Daddy.
Rattlesnake Daddy.
Right.
And what was your first song? Do you recall, Cliff?
The first song I ever recorded was on Jeanette. It's You Possibly Surmise, being the first records I ever made. And the name of the first one I ever recorded, and of course I wrote this song. The name of it was Just a Lonely Hobo. It's a very well-known song.
Yes,
You may
I
know
should
that.
say. Yeah, that became a standard over the years.
Mhm.
Now, did you write most of your material in those early days?
Yes, we did. We sure did.
Did you write together?
Some, but very little we wrote together. Most time it was we wrote separately. I don't know. Do we have any songs together,
I don't
Cliff?
know, but I'll tell you one thing. Me and Bill, in our lifetime, have been so much alike, so close together, that we have been almost inseparable. And many times, I would probably be in one city away, and I would write a song. And Bill would write one in New York City somewhere else, or some other city, and they would be so closely related, and tune and lyrics and all. It just was fantastic, the way we thought. And we still do that, Bill. We still think that way. Isn't that peculiar?
It's an amazing thing, and I think it's certainly something scholars can ponder over. Bill, who produced those early records? Did Art Satherley do them?
W.R. Calloway. W.R. Calloway and Art, a lot of times they'd both be in there. But like Cliff said, Mr. Satherley, I would say, started me in the career. Of course, Cliff made records before I did, but I would say that Mr. Satherley was definitely the man that put me into the music business.
What was the big difference between a session then and a session now?
Well, they used to cut it, Bill, we used to cut on wax, which was this, I'll say, inch and a half, 2 inches thick. And if it didn't come, it was like a record, only it was soft. The needle would cut the groove out and cut your voice in there, but it couldn't be played back. It had to be pressed some way or another and hardened, But if it didn't come off right, all they'd have to do, they had a blade that they could let down there on the head, and it would shave it off. They start over again. Did you ever see that?
No, I've
You
never
didn't see
seen
that
that.
done?
No, never have.
And then they after you cut it, they'd put that in the refrigerator, didn't they, Cliff?
Yeah.
And it would harden,
Because it would run, the grooves would run together.
That's right. And it would harden. Then they would, some way they processed that.
Press, they would press what they call a master off of that. The master would be a metallic platter, and then they'd take naturally take the master platter, the metallic platter, and press thousands off of that. You see.
But the difference is now it's on tape when it used to be on that wax.
Right. And it's just about as easy to splice today as it was to shave back then.
Oh man, yeah, and another thing too, now you can if you make a mistake, if it's made in the right place on the record, why they don't even have to go back and do the first part of that record. You can just start right there, and they can splice it,
Right.
But then, if you made a mistake, you had to do it over again.
Well, Bill, you and Cliff have talked about the early recording contracts and $50 a side. What about early personal appearances? First of all, how did you get booked?
I'd tell you, well, it was back then we didn't have the promoters and the bookers like we do now. If you was on a local radio station, people would write into you.
See.
And sponsors,
Yeah, and you booked yourself then.
Right, that's the way it was back then when I
Most of it was
yeah.
by mail.
right.
What would a good performance bring in the way of money, Cliff?
Thinking of it from a standpoint of your admission price then was 15, and you had an age limit, of course. Adults 25 cents. Then, of course, later on it went up as the years came and go. But you can figure up if you had we first started back there. Then if you had a crowd of say 5,000 people in a ballpark, or 10,000, whatever you might have, then of course in a school auditorium you'd fill it up, and sometime you'd have to put two shows, or maybe you'd have 700 seats. Well, if you filled it twice, you had 1,400 people, and you figure about 20% of them being children, and this would be about the only way you could arrive at the.
Your receipts would be only $200 or $300 then.
Yeah,
or
that's
something
right.
like that.
Yeah. They of course the thing about it is you have to think about so many people maybe here listening to this tape would think, gee, that's not much money. But in that day, that was a whole lot of money. It was equal then to, probably $900 to $1,000 today, $300 then, because things are just advanced that much higher and maybe more. But we done all right.
Bill, most of those early dates were in schoolhouses and ballparks and things of this, weren't they? You didn't think really in terms of big auditoriums back then, did you, or nightclubs, anything of this sort?
No, we didn't work in nightclubs, no. And the package shows were very few times that you would have more than one act, And that's where nowadays, you've got to really have a show. They don't figure it a big show unless you have a package show,
right.
which contains 4 or 5 acts, name acts.
May I say a word?
Sure, Cliff.
Sorry, Bill, to butt in on you.
No, you're not.
What my brother Bill is saying is this, that each group had carried anywhere from 5 to 8 people on a show, and the show was different than to what they are now. They wasn't all musical. You had a certain amount of musical show. You had people that would come in between while your comedian was getting ready to come in and do a solo act or a duet would go out. And these side men now, that what they call side men now, was just part of your show.
That's right.
And you could take 7 people and arrange it right, and you'd think if you didn't know the show, you'd think that you had 15 people on that show, because some of your artists on there, sidemen, whatever you want to call them, are very versatile. You see, and they can do these different things.
Well, sure.
I'm sorry.
That's right.
That's what Bill was
Sure.
saying.
From those sidemen, too, came the stars of a few years
Right.
later. Now, we've talked about the good old days, everything from the breaking up the beehives to playing the $200 shows. But were there any times in that long span you had when you became discouraged and thought about giving it up?
You talking to me?
I'll ask you first, Cliff.
Never. I did get out of the business 2 or 3 times. One time was during World War II. I got out of business and went and started working in a powder plant for 2 years to help win that war. And I felt it was my duty. And Bill did the same thing, and I'm sure many other artists did. But as far as being discouraged, Bill, no, I never did get discouraged. I have often been discouraged with a crowd maybe that I had. I would anticipate a larger crowd than I would have. And, of course, then you begin to wonder and lose a little sleep. Say, well, now, where did I err in my advertising? Because you had no promoters. Your booking was done through the mail from principal of school to you, and or from the police department of the town to you. And this is the way it was done. Well, you would get your advertising already, send it out, and explain to them how you wanted to distribute it. Sometime they would, sometime they wouldn't. So this is the only discouragement you have. Right. Or the only discouragement I had.
Those pretty much your feelings?
That's right. Yes, I would
you
say.
You said you were just alike anyway. So
yeah, well, I'll say that it was, I feel about the same way about that, Bill.
Bill, how many songs would you say that you have written over these years? Do you have any idea at all?
Maybe 300, maybe. I imagine I've written that many. Of course, I didn't do something with all of them.
Sure. But
that's just I never have kept an accurate account of my songs. And right now, I couldn't even tell you the titles of half of them. And a man came up to me in Canada, Ontario, Canada, just the other night, and he says, do you remember such and such a song? And he said he's got a record. And, faintly I remembered it. But now, I recorded it, but I could, to me, it wasn't a hit in my mind. It didn't make an impression on me. It's just another song. And we used to record a lot of them like that when we went to record. Maybe we'd have 3 or 4 we was sold on. We just throw the others in. That's the way I did, because I knew I couldn't get all of them hits.
Well, I'm going to concentrate on your career for just a few minutes, and we'll go to Cliff
right.
again. What's the biggest record you've had, Bill?
I would say No Help
Wanted. Yeah.
Right.
Certainly, it was, as they say in the music business, a monster.
Yes, it was.
And at least the present-day jargon, that means a great record. What are some of the other big ones, Bill?
Too Old to Cut the Mustard
Yeah.
has been a moneymaker. And I think maybe if it was had it been in a place right at the time when No Help Wanted was recorded, it might have been just as big by us. But it was recorded by more people, Rosemary Clooney recorded it,
Right. Did you write that too?
Yes. And then we had one at Charlie and I leave Leuven Road called Is That You, Myrtle? Right. These are all novelty things. Mm-hmm. And they sound silly, but they really sold. Yeah. And one called Knot Hole, you remember that?
Yes, sure.
And of course we had this thing just recently called What Kind of Deal Is This, which was pretty good too.
Sure.
That's right.
In the early days, when you and Cliff worked together, did you do mostly novelty tunes, or did that come later?
I did some ballads, but I more or less have always kind of catered to the jump type tunes.
Yeah. Now, speaking of jumping, I was going to get into that, because one of your great trademarks, of course, on stage, is your ability to leap. I know this has led to embarrassing moments at times too, but when did this start, Bill?
Oh, well, this started back 20 years ago at least.
Was it just a spur of the moment thing?
Yeah. Well, I used to. Yeah, it's Hot Shot Elmer. I used to do a character called Hot Shot Elmer, and I would jump from the floor. I'd jump off the stage and walk out the audience, and when I come back, they'd be expecting me to go back to the steps, but I'd just stand flat-footed and jump on the stage, from wherever I was. See, so then I got to certain points of my songs. I thought, well, it'd be good just as a novelty to jump, and that's the way it kind of started. Of course, when I was doing Hot Shot, I was barefooted, and I could jump a lot higher then than I could with my shoes on.
This was a comedy routine you did?
Right, right. Yeah, character Ruth character.
Bill, you're part Indian, aren't you?
Yes, part.
It's been about how much, roughly?
Well, my great-grandmother was full-blooded Cherokee.
I always wondered whether this was tied in with your ability to leap or anything, any
No, I
connection
don't.
with that at all.
I don't know, but I always liked to be active, and really I didn't think about it being so much a show as I just did it because I liked to.
Sure.
You know?
Well, it certainly became a great show trait, though. What are some of the labels from the early days with the American Record Corporation? Was that it?
Yes.
Where did you go from there?
From there, I went. Let's see, to Decca, I believe, and I from there went to King, and I've been on nearly all of them. Went from there to RCA, and then to Mercury, and now Hickory.
You really have. You've been on major label
That's right.
all through the years, always on majors, which is a credit to you in itself. Now, your youngsters, Bill and Sheila, are part of your act. Did you train them from an early time?
Well, naturally, I guess every father, if he's inclined, anything you're inclined to do, if you drove a train, why the kids would be interested in it. So they've always seemed like, right when they got old enough to even try to sing, that they could carry a tune. So I didn't, to say, push them, but I encouraged them if I thought they liked it.
And Sheila can find a little time from her horses while she likes to sing. Huh?
Right. Sheila is a very good singer too. She travels with me a lot now, and she sings beautiful.
Well, now I know that she and Billy can both sing pop music as well as country.
That's right.
Now, did you at any time ever go this route, consider singing anything but country?
No, because I couldn't. Yeah, I couldn't. I'm not going to say that I'm so loyal I didn't, but I just never did try it. I just enjoyed country, and I stuck with it.
Right. Cliff, getting back to you now, when Bill was making these changes from ARC to Decca and to Mercury and so forth, were you doing pretty much the same thing, going from one major label to another?
Well, we used to change together.
Yeah, that's right.
We were.
You changed as the Carlisle
That's
Brothers,
right.
huh?
That's
That was,
right. But these records that he made his solo, of course, was just made as on a different contract. At the same time, we were both signed as the Carlisle Brothers with a company too.
Now, when is the last time the two of you performed together as the Carlisle Brothers?
Oh, let's see. The last time.
You mean professionally?
Yeah, Bill, professionally.
Oh, we was working out of Knoxville,
Oh, this is
Yeah. and we played that courthouse.
That sounds like a great story, yeah. That sounds like a great story.
Yeah, it is. Cliff asked him to quieten down. It was a courthouse. We was on stage down below. And Cliff told him, said, now, he just kept on.
We couldn't put on a show.
And Cliff said, now, I'm going to come up and move you out personally. Of course, when Cliff started up there, I had to go. You know, I was dressed up like Hotshot Elmer, but I had to go along with him, you know. And so I got a hold of his feet, and Cliff got a hold of his other part of his
Shoulder,
body. Yeah, and we carried him down. We carried him down the steps.
Great.
Outside.
When was that, do you recall, Bill?
Well, as Cliff says, well, boy, he said, I tell you, when it gets works on me like this, I may as well quit. He said he quit. That's the last show we done, wasn't it?
I don't know if that was the last show.
Yeah, it was.
we
That
did.
was the last one. Of course, he had done planned he was going to quit then. He'd done planned that he was going to move to Lexington. And
Do you recall what year that was?
Lord, no, I don't know.
Was
I don't
in the
remember.
late 40s.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
yeah.
exactly.
But he's tough.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Oh, he's rough, man.
He's fixing to get somebody to take a pop at me out here. I'm not tough, are you?
Well, these little brotherhood jokes that lasted through the years. Huh?
Yeah. But that was funny. The guy had a knife in his hand too, Bill.
Well,
And
oh,
he-
really?
Oh yeah, and Cliff called it a Charlie horse on him. and he dropped the knife.
Which is unfortunate. Yeah.
Choked him what he wanted to do.
Well, did you record together any time after that?
No, I said you quit.
I worked, even after I retired.
Oh, he came down. Cliff worked up. Hey, by the way, Cliff sung on Too Old Cut the Mustard, and No Help Wanted too.
On both those records?
Sure he did. He came down here. He flew down here, man, and helped me. Yeah.
Well, those were the last two then.
I guess it's about it, wasn't it, Cliff?
Well, together, yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
Well, you say together. Did you do a single after that or anything?
did.
For real.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
shut up
Oh,
till I get finished.
He's tough. I'll be quiet.
I did album 12, one of the
Sure,
large
yeah.
records for Rim Recording Company, who is, I understand now, is out of business. And I also did 2 or 3 45s for them. But they didn't sell a million.
Well, it's you had to taper off somewhere along the line. You think? Do you think songs are better today? The songwriters who write the material today, do they write better copy than they did, say, 20, 30 years ago?
Majority of these boys are experts. They really make a business out of it today. If you want to go back to my day and Bill's early part of Bill's career, I place him in the category of still in the business, of course. But if you want to go back to the early part of our country music business together, I'd say that the way it used to be, you wrote for rhymes rather than sense.
Mm-hmm.
And you can play many of the old, especially the old blues of Jimmy Rogers, find this out. But today, and it begun in the early 40s, it tells a story. And this is the thing that counts. This is what you can get out of your heart as a story, you see. And I'd say that the songwriters today are placed in a very, very special category and much better songwriters than we ever were in our day. Of course, that our songs were probably in that day as good as they are today. But I'm talking about when you get right down to brass tacks, boy, there's some good songs. And then I'll tell you something. So that's the good news. Now, the bad news is some of them is the worst I ever heard, too.
Well, I'll have to agree with you, I'm afraid. Some pretty bad ones. But no, these are the things that should be said because it's an honest appraisal of the situation which exists. Bill, over the years, and excluding your own brother, who certainly did so much for you, who are some of the people who have helped you in your career one way or another, through encouragement, through actual help, through giving you advice, things of this sort? Who are some of these people?
Well, you've asked me something maybe I'd have to think a little while on. If you want to know who were some inspirations to me, I would say Gene Autry was an inspiration. And Jimmy Rogers was. Roy Acuff, certainly, he's a gentleman and such a nice guy. And, of course, Ernest Tubb. The old-time greats, you know. Even before, the Grand Ole Opry was really something to me before I came here. Even though I was in the business professionally, I felt like I never would be satisfied unless I came to the Opry. And we listened to the boys on the Grand Ole Opry, and they meant a lot to us. Uncle Dave was a wonderful entertainer. Now, as an entertainer, Uncle Dave was an inspiration to me, too.
When did you come to the Opry, Bill?
15 years ago, to 54. Would it be about 54?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cliff, what about your life? Who are some of the people who affected it more than any of them?
Well, W.R. Calloway was my personal manager for some time, several years. And of course, he was connected with the American Record Corporation. He was a scout for them for a long time. As Bill says, many artists have an awful lot of influence upon your career and upon your life. Jimmy Rogers was more or less my idol, although I started about a couple of years after he did. He still was my idol because I loved that blue yodel, and of course that was what I worked on for a long, long time. And of course I met Jimmy. I recorded with Jimmy in Louisville, Kentucky. I don't remember the date, but it was sometime during the 20s. And I thought a lot of him. I think he thought a lot of me. I hope he did. And W.R. Calloway, was not an artist, but he did work very hard to try to promote. And you got to give a certain amount of credit to the promoter. Outside of I'd say half a dozen people that I knew that was in the music business professionally, show business, I'd say I can cut it off there. Now, I think the greatest inspiration to me, Bill, was my public. People that we would go out to the places to put on a show, and when you finished and they came to the front with their smiling faces and their handshakes of goodwill and howdy, this does something to you. When they just touch you, you can just feel they love you. And to try to please these people who love you so much that this is the way you make your livelihood, and they are your livelihood, I'd say that they really are the greatest inspiration to any artist.
Well, you know, I was going to ask you if you had your life to live over, would you do the same thing? But I don't think I have to ask that now, because I think you've already answered it. You most certainly would. So I'll ask this final question of both of you. Bill, what do you think a performer owes his public?
He really, a performer owes his public the same thing. If you went to a factory to work hard, to work, the man pays you. He deserves the best out of you, and I would say the same thing. The people, your audience deserves the best.
Cliff, would you add anything to that?
I would only add this, that you are obligated to love. I mean, honestly love your public and respect them. And not as much as they love and respect you, but more. Because they are your livelihood. They are your money.
Well put. This has been a fascinating